I was a 22-year-old student who delivered for Uber Eats part-time. I didn't actually need the job, but my parents had strong traditional values and raised me to value hard work. So, I suppose you could say I was trying to make them proud. Since I was in school, my shifts were almost always in the nights, which is when the majority of the orders arrived anyway. I took a large order from a sushi restaurant for a house on a side street I didn't know very well. I assumed that was the wealthy area of town, but when I got closer, it felt more like the middle of nowhere. The roadside was sparsely populated with abandoned farmhouses and old cornfields. It was soon after 11 p.m., and there were no street lights. I felt vulnerable, like if my headlights were the only thing separating me from the unending blackness. As I approached my location, I was relieved to find a bright light shining through the front window on the lowest floor of the house. It was an old farmhouse, as were the other houses in the vicinity. The nearest neighbor was at least a mile away in each direction, but that didn't matter because I was almost positive that every other property was unoccupied. I pulled up to the front of the house and spotted numerous people's shadows behind the front window drapes. It appeared that they were having a party. As I walked up the walkway to the front door, I noticed something odd. There were no cars other than mine. This region was clearly not on any public transport route. It's likely they got a taxi or utilized Uber, so I wasn't concerned. It did seem strange though. I knocked on the door and waited. After less than a minute, the door opened, and I was met by an elderly woman dressed in an elaborate red gown. She was dressed up with cosmetics and crimson lipstick. I could hear music coming from the other room, where the party appeared to be.
"Thank you, sweetie. My guests will be overjoyed that the food has arrived,"
she added with a grandmotherly tone. "Not a problem. Have a good night," I replied with a standard scripted greeting. I was ready to turn around and return to my car when she interrupted me.
"Oh dear, you're leaving without your tip."
"Whatever you left on the app should be fine." That's what I said. I checked my phone and saw that she had already left a big tip.
"I'm a traditional lady, and I prefer to give it to you in person."
I was torn. The solitude of the place gave me the creeps, but I was reassured by the fact that the house appeared to be full of other people. That, combined with her grandmotherly demeanor, made me feel comfortable. I didn't want to be impolite, so I complied. "All right, thank you. That is very generous," I said pleasantly.
"Excellent. Come in and get comfy. I need to find my purse. This dress has no pockets."
I went inside and waited in the lobby until the woman disappeared down the corridor. The party was going on in the next room, with a closed door between us. I could hear the woman rummaging around, and it appeared she was in the basement. That looked like an unusual place to store her purse. I was nervous, but I was reassured by the idea that there was a room full of people right next door. They were curiously silent though. I could hear music, but no conversation. I wondered what was going on inside. Just then, the woman exclaimed,
"Young fellow, can you come down here? I need your help with something."
Her pleasant tone transformed to a frightening chuckle. My mood shifted suddenly. I should have left, but my curiosity wouldn't let me. I moved closer to the door that separates the foyer from the party. I cracked the door open and looked inside. There were 7 to 10 mannequins spread throughout the room. I was completely alone. Fear surged through my body, and I heard a door crash. The old woman stood at the end of the corridor with the creepiest smile I'd ever seen.
"Would you like to join us?"
I couldn't say anything. All I could do was run for my car. I'm not sure if she chased me. I didn't have time to investigate. I've moved on from this position since then. Following graduating, I secured an internship at a huge technology business. There's no way of knowing what her plans were for me, and I'm grateful every day that I never found out. It's been approximately 6 months since I began driving for Uber. Previously, I worked in a high-pressure legal environment, so the pay isn't what I'm used to. That is not why I do it. The flexibility is the true reason I made the shift. In my prior job, the idea of work-life balance was virtually ludicrous. 12-hour days, work calls in the middle of the night. It was tough. I was working the night shift in downtown, primarily driving inebriated folks home from the clubs. I had the occasional unruly passenger, but most evenings were very quiet. Last night, though, was everything but. It was after 2 a.m., and I was about to call it a night when I got a trip request. It was around 20 minutes away, but it was in the same direction as my flat, so I reluctantly agreed. My eyelids had become heavy as I walked past the vacant streets, which had been packed with late-night partygoers only an hour before. The full moon illuminated the deserted metropolis enough that flashy street lights were unnecessary. As I neared the pickup destination, I noticed a tall man in his 40s glancing at his phone. He had short black hair and glasses, and a frustrated expression on his face, as if he was straining to type his password correctly. He had the latest iPhone 15 in a bright red cover. I noted because I was considering upgrading to the same. He shook like a branch in a windstorm, exuding all the characteristics of someone who has had too much to drink. I told myself that he must have had a good night. After all, I had encountered intoxicated passengers before. As my car came to a stop in front of him, he lowered his phone. "You must be Jake," I stated. "That's what the ladies call me," he said, laughing out loud. I gave a full smirk out of sympathy for what I assumed was a joke. He jumped into the back seat, and we drove off. Although I couldn't smell any alcohol on him, he continued to exhibit indicators of inebriation. I'm not a drinker, but I don't judge, especially because it is better that they ride with me rather than getting behind the wheel themselves. I thought to myself. He had planned to make one halt along the route. "We just need to pick something up from my brother's house," he went on to say. His voice was unusually clear for someone who I imagined had been drinking. Something about his demeanor seemed odd, as if his gestures were overdone and forced. I didn't think much of it. It had been a long night, and I wasn't quite confident in my own judgment. "No problem," I responded. I pulled up in front of what I assumed was his brother's house, but it was actually an apartment block in a dangerous neighborhood. "Do you need help?" I inquired. "No, just pop the trunk," he answered. I did as he said, feeling creeped out. Jake and another man carried a large black duffel bag into my trunk, and I observed them through the rearview mirror. Jake was not inebriated, as evidenced by his motions and the muffled conversation I observed via the mirror. But, why pretend? He must have put on a show for me. Perhaps this was a cruel prank. Before I could respond, Jake jumped into the rear seat, and the other man vanished. As we resumed our journey, Jake became quiet. His bloodshot eyes looked at me through the mirror with a blazing intensity. Perhaps he sensed my apprehension and assumed I was investigating his evil activities. He wasn't even acting intoxicated anymore. I wanted to get this ride over with, but I didn't want to cancel and upset him. I figured it was best to drop him off and hope we don't cross paths again. When I arrived at his final destination, I felt a big weight lifted off of my shoulders. "Well, this is it," I said with false politeness. He was staring at his phone again, as if he were trying to unlock it. Why was he having such difficulties with his phone? I pondered, when I knew he wasn't even drunk. To my relief, Jake stepped out of my car and went to the trunk, which I had opened for him. He slammed it shut and vanished into the night without saying anything. "What a relief," I exclaimed. Whatever he was doing seemed unrelated to me. I was still interested about what was inside the duffel bag, but I assumed I'd never find out. I sighed with relief as I pulled into my driveway following one of the craziest evenings of my life. I always checked my car at the end of the night to see whether my passengers had left anything behind. There is usually not much to find. Most individuals are careful with their belongings. My first scan yielded no results. However, when I searched beneath the back seat, I discovered a bright red iPhone 15. There was no doubt it was Jake's. Normally, I would try to return it to its rightful owner, but Jake freaked me out so much that I was ready to toss it away. I turned it on expecting to see a selfie as the backdrop image, but it wasn't Jake. It resembled a young man in his 20s, with short red hair and freckles. This was not Jake's phone at all. That explains why he was having trouble using it. My stomach fell when I realized something else. I didn't see Jake take the bag from my trunk. I moved around to the rear of the car, struggling to keep back the tears. When I opened the trunk, I was horrified to find the enormous duffel bag still inside. My hand moved slowly towards the zipper on the bag. When I pulled it down, I discovered a dead body in the bag, which will haunt my dreams for the rest of my life. To make matters worse, he was the young guy with short hair and freckles. The phone belonged to him. Uber's records will prove that I was the last person to see this man alive, and Jake was clearly smart enough to clean his fingerprints before leaving. I can't go to the police anymore, so I just have one option. Now I only need to find a shovel.